Welcome to Rose Talk, where we discuss a variety of issues relating to international politics and security. This series aims to facilitate discussions to better understand the developments and their implications, as well as what could or needs to be done.
Hi, my name is Tatta, project researcher at the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology at the University of Tokyo.
And I'm Hinata-Yamaguchi, project assistant professor, also at the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology at the University of Tokyo.
In this episode, I'll be talking with Rio about the recent developments concerning North Korea and also about the strategies and politics of the country. First, recent developments. So far, this month, the first month of 2022, North Korea has conducted about 7 missile test launches. What is behind the latest developments?
Yeah, well, so far, North Korea has really upped the tempo of its military activities and also capability developments. And this has sort of continued, or it has really started from about 2 years ago in 2020. And so what we see, there's a lot of factors behind what North Korea is doing right now. But first one is generally about strengthening the military. North Korea is trying to strengthen its military readiness, particularly its missile capabilities. And what North Korea is trying to do here regarding its missiles is to diversify and enhance almost every single type of missile that it has, because each system has its own share of strengths and weaknesses. So North Korea wants to possess a collection of a variety of missiles, to sort of complement, supplement one another, because that is critical to, mount credible and reliable capabilities. Now, there are also messages behind what North Korea is doing in recent weeks or recent months. First one, obviously, this is the standard operation for North Korea, and that is to stir and test the reactions of the United States, South Korea, Japan, and also to some extent China. And timing is really important because there's a lot of things going on around the world right now. We have the crisis in Ukraine and also Russia. We also have the US-China conflict going on. We also have the presidential elections coming up in South Korea. So there's a lot of things going on. A lot of countries are distracted. So North Korea understands that this is really the right time to do something bold while it's getting away with it. And with the Beijing Winter Olympics coming up, later this week, North Korea wants to do as much as it can right now, right? Before all the festivities begin. Now, on top of that, there is also this other message that North Korea is sending, and that is partially related to the coronavirus or the corona pandemic, and that North Korea is currently undergoing a 5-year plan to develop its military technologies. So it wants to prove both domestically and internationally that everything's going well, that North Korea is hustling through with its missile development program and other military capability development program, despite the disruptions caused by the corona pandemic. Now, turning to yesterday's launch, right? Yesterday's launch is extremely important to look at because yesterday's missile test launch by North Korea was the biggest missile test launch since 2017. Okay, and it was an intermediate range ballistic missile known as Hwasong-12. Now, that missile has a potential to reach about 4,500 to 5,000 kilometers, reaching all of Japan and also Guam, right? Now, a lot of people who have looked at North Korea will say North Korea promised not to test these long-range missiles or nuclear weapons, in 2018. Although that's partially true, there needs to be some context and some details that we need to sort of remember here. And that is that what North Korea did was a unilaterally made self-imposed moratorium that was basically a message to say, we will take a break with long-range missile tests and nuclear tests while the negotiations with the United States and South Korea are making good progress, particularly the United States. So from the North Korean point of view, they're thinking, well, we kept our end of the deal, but South Korea and the US has not. So why the hell should we do that, right? So it's really a way for North Korea to say, we've run out of patience. You've let us down. You're the one that failed the negotiations. So, well, we're going to go back to testing again. So there's that part as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this goes back to the problems caused in 2018 when we had the inter-Korean summits between President Moon Jae-in of South Korea and also Kim Jong-un, and also Donald Trump of the United States and Kim Jong-un. Back then, there were a lot of summits, but those summits were held without the right strategies. And so they also gave away a lot of things. They also made a lot of offers, and they sort of, provide some incentives in front of North Korea and so forth. And so North Korea has held that as a standard. They're not going to accept anything less. Anything less than that, North Korea say, "Hey, you broke the deal, right? You guys didn't keep up to what you promised, but what you promised or what you offered, blah 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 blah." And so, North Korea, I think, is now really so showing that attitude.
And should we, the people in Japan, be worried about the missiles from North Korea? And what are the actual risks for Japan?
Okay, now that can be divided into several parts, and that's a really important question for us here in Japan. The risks are big, whether it be in terms of war or even before war begins, because if a war breaks out or if any kind of conflict breaks out with North Korea will be aiming Japan, not only because North Korea sees Japan as the enemy and they see the Japan self-defense force as a threat, but also because we had the US forces here in Japan as well, particularly this US 7th Fleet based in Yokosuka and so forth. So, North Korea, we can be sure that if some kind of conflict breaks out, those missiles will be heading towards Japan. Now, of course, Japan and the United States has worked out, ballistic missile defense systems. We have, intelligence and reconnaissance and surveillance out there and so forth, but still the risks are there. Now, the risks are also, are fairly big even before conflict breaks out in that, we have a variety of ways in which North Korea will try to harass, Japan, the United States and South Korea as well, because we have something called hybrid warfare in that wars are not always about using weapons. We have use of information, cyber attacks, spreading of misinformation, espionage, and all that kind of stuff. So that's also something that we have to think about as well. Another thing that we should worry about regarding going back to North Korean missiles is that, given that North Korea often launches these missiles here and there is also that risk of those missiles falling somewhere. So if North Korea says, "Okay, we want to scare Japan and the United States, let's shoot a missile over Japan." Well, okay, of course it's frustrating and something that's unacceptable, but what if that missile accidentally falls, right? What if North Koreans, make some kind of mistake, and what if that missile accidentally falls on Japan? That's also something that we also have to worry about as well. So we have to worry about, North Korean missiles falling onto Japan. Okay, the chances may be remote, but it's still there. Okay, or for example, a missile falling on a ship or hitting an airplane. That's also something that we have to think about. In that it's also about transport security. Now, obviously, we may say that North Koreans are not going to sort of dare to do something so risky, but again, even if the chances are, are very low, like 1%, that's still a risk. And so, again, the risk is there. How do we solve it? Again, it comes down to the right balance of defense and diplomacy. But it's really about how the North Koreans can negotiate with the Americans, and also to some extent, China and South Korea. But it's really about the United States. There is this talk about ending the Korean War, because remember, the Korean War is still going on, right? They've signed an armistice in 1953 to halt the fighting or pause the fighting, but the war is still going on. So there is this talk about ending the war once and for all, but here's the trick. How do you negotiate with the North Koreans about that? On the one hand, we can say, okay, it's unconditional. We will negotiate with you guys. Let's just end the war once and for all. That could be one way. But the thing is, sooner or later, you're gonna have to negotiate details. Things like human rights abuses in North Korea, responsibility for the war, the number of times North Korea has broken the armistice, denuclearization and so forth, right? So do you take that approach, or do you say to North Korea, okay, we will sign a peace treaty with you, if we address all of these points. Okay? Now, there's pros and cons of both. If we go the unconditional path, well, then the North Koreans will sign something, but the negotiations afterward are going to be very, very tough. And on top of that, we never know what the North Koreans are going to do anyhow. On the other hand, if we start with conditions, the problem here is that the North Koreans probably won't even answer or pick up the phone, and they will just say, "Look, we're not going to talk with you guys if you're going to sit at these conditions, in front of us." Because North Korea hates it when anyone sets conditions on them. They want to be in charge of the game. So that's one thing, and that's a really important point because, the current president in South Korea is saying, "Let's have a peace declaration, not a treaty, but a declaration, like a verbal promise to end the war," but that's not legally binding. So again, the promise can be broken in time. And on top of that, a declaration does not solve all the other things that North Korea has done. Again, responsibility for the war, human rights abuses, breaking of the armistice, nuclear weapons, and so forth. So that's something that we have to think about. Do we go for something symbolic or do we go for something substantive? Okay? Now, as for dealing with the military threat, going back to the point about Japan, again, this is the really tough one. We need the right strategy. Okay? Now, what is that strategy? That's something that we all have to think about right now. It's a really tough one. If anyone knows the answer to that, well, we wouldn't be struggling this much. But it's really, Japan can't go alone. It has to work closely with the United States, and also where possible, it should work with South Korea as well. US, Japan, South Korea, that trio. The problem is that even if those three countries says, yeah, let's cooperate somehow, there are going to be some gaps in terms of what they want to achieve in the end, but also the capacity as well. Some countries may say, look, well, we can do this, but we can't do that. So coordinating those three countries are not so easy. Now, going into small details, we also have to think about what kinds of concepts and doctrines do these three countries work with? Do we have the right chemistry, if I can put it in that way, to put up the right defense strategies and also diplomatic strategies against North Korea? That's something we have to think about. So it's really about having the right strategies, operational concepts and doctrines, and also having the right assets as well. Regarding assets, I think it's there, right? The armed forces of United States and South Korea and the self-defense force of Japan, they've got the right assets pretty much. Okay, it's really about the recipe to use them effectively against the North Korean threat.
So why is North Korea so keen on developing armed forces? I mean, why is North Korea investing so much into its military despite the economic troubles they have? So what is North Korea's strategic goals?
Okay, and that's like one of the biggest frequently asked questions regarding North Korea. In that, for a lot of us, we'll say, why in the hell is North Korea spending so much money on its military and developing its military or prioritizing development of its military when its people are suffering so much? And to answer that question, we should divide the answer into about maybe 2 or 3 parts. Okay? And that's about strategy, the role of the military, and also the politics, and also the economy as well. So it's essentially 4. Now, starting with the basics, the strategic goal of North Korea is the unification of the Korean Peninsula. Okay, so unifying the 2 Koreas under North Korean terms, or at the very least, its influence of some kind. Now, there are a lot of people out there that will say North Korea has given up on unification. They don't have the capacity for that. They just want to survive. They want to be left alone. Well, I can partially understand that. It's also important to understand that it's not about unification or regime survival. It's not one or the other. Those two are 2 sides of the same coin. In that, North Korea is not going to accept unification if it is going to compromise the authority or sovereignty. In other words, it's hard to imagine North Korea saying, yeah, we will go, let's unify, and we are willing to sacrifice our political system or governing system. Kim Jong-un or his father or his grandfather never even touched on that, right? That's something that they will never accept. So North Korea is not going to accept unification that compromises authority or sovereignty. While at the same time, unification is really the ultimate way to guarantee their regime survival. So it's again two sides of the same coin, and that's the strategy of that's the strategic goal of North Korea. Now, where does the military come in? Well, a lot comes down to the way in which the North Korean government or the North Korean leadership has always believed that the military is the tool to solve almost all problems. Now, partially that comes from the fact that Kim Il Sung, the founding father of North Korea, was a guerrilla soldier, pre 1945, right? So he's been, that military guy, right? And so he believed, he sort of grew up, and with the belief that the military is the only solution to solving various problems that a country faces and so forth. He also believed that because Korea did not have a strong military, well, it was exploited by various other countries, right? That belief is strong. And so North Korea inherited that. Also, for North Korea, the military is an institution that must survive. They've seen various episodes around the world, like Romania, where the military, basically executed the leader and so forth. North Korea knows that the military always has to be on the leadership side. They know the importance of that. And so for North Korea, substantively, the military is institution for national defense, but also as like the bodyguard of the leadership. On top of that, there's also a political aspect to that, in that, the North Korean military, the Korean People's Army, there's that defense aspect, the security aspect, but the military is also the icon of North Korea's national identity and pride. So there's a lot of political value there. On top of that, North Korea is really the institutional expression of, Kim Il Sung or North Korea's policy for self-reliance, because they didn't get along with, they had difficulties with the Chinese and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, right? Because the Chinese and the Soviets fought against one another. North Korea was wedged in the middle, and so North Korea believed, well, we cannot fully rely on our allies, right? We don't want to be over dependent on other countries. We need to stand up for ourselves, right? We need to stand on our 2 feet, and that means we need to have a strong military that is self-reliant. And so North Korea pushed ahead with its defense planning doctrine called the line of self-reliant defense, and there's 4 parts here. The line of self-reliant defense includes modernization of the entire army, making the entire military a cadre army, also fortification of the whole state, and also arming of the populace, right? They are the 4 keys that North Korea deemed are vital to make a strong military, but also a strong country. And so North Korea has gone ahead with that. Now, obviously, that is extremely expensive, right? North Korea has to invest a lot of money because he has to somehow find ways in which it can produce its own weapons or strengthen its own military, whilst also ensuring that the leadership has full control of the military. So a lot of money goes into this. And so that's why, North Korea, has made, in the military economy, also the military budget, so the number one. And that money comes not only from the state economy, but also the party funds and also other illicit activities. Turning now to the economy. Now, if the question is about, whether the North Korean economy is poor, the answer is yes. Yeah, there are signs of modernization. If we look at some clips that come out from North Korea or some photographs that come out from North Korea, Pyongyang in particular, there is modernization. We see new buildings and so forth. We see new trains or the new subway carriages. We see, a new military hardware and so forth. So there is modernization. That said, Pyongyang is a showcase. If you go to the countryside, where 85% of the people live, you do see poverty. We see lack of critical infrastructures. We see houses with very little or no electricity or gas. We see a lot of people suffering and so forth. So that's the reality of North Korea, right? In that, if you want to see the real North Korean economy, you go to the countryside. Now, when we look at those things, we will assume that, well, the North Korea is going to collapse, right? They have collapsed economically, but they have politically survived. And what that tells us is that North Korea, over the years, has found a way in which the state or the government or the leadership can survive, even if the economy, the state economy or the general economy is in a dirt poor state. And they found that formula. We see evidence of that now. Okay, when we look at North Korea, and going back to the earlier point, North Korea has always seen that it is much more urgent to fund the military or to develop the military because that is the thing that is going to keep North Korea alive and the leadership alive as well. And the military economy is huge. They have about 200 or 300 military factories, around North Korea, and they are again all controlled by the leadership. We also have a lot of research institutes and universities in North Korea that are also part of, or they help the military. So the military economy is huge, okay? And of course that comes from the fact that North Korean government has devoted so much to the military sector. At the same time, there's one important thing, and that is that because of the economic troubles in North Korea, that also means that the military economy has also suffered, because it's so big.
Yeah.
And so we have logistical problems like lack of fuel, so energy shortages are extremely chronic in North Korea. We have periodic blackouts and so forth. They lack oil and gas, spare parts. They have not so much good access to technology, and also we have to think about human resources, because if we have people starving and so forth, right, or people who were starving, or at least people who are in extremely unhealthy state because of poor medical infrastructure and services, that also means that we are going to have a lot of soldiers in the North Korean military who are not fully fit for military service. And North Korea has extremely large military. About 5% of the population, has is in military right now. So it's about 1 point something million, 1.3 million full-time soldiers, and about 7 million part-time soldiers. But again, a lot of soldiers are not in good state. So again, we see how the economic troubles in North Korea have also impacted the military itself as well.
So turning to politics, how has North Korea survived for so long? Why isn't there revolt against the regime?
Yeah, and that's another big, so frequently asked question regarding North Korea. And we've all asked that question for about 40 years now. Towards the end of the Cold War, in the 1980s, a lot of people thought that North Korea would go down, just like many of the other social states that also collapsed during that time. But North Korea survived. And a lot of, in part, it's because of the way in which the country is structured, in that they're fairly isolated compared to many of the East European states and so forth. But the other explanation is because of the internal aspects of North Korea. For one, from the time when North Korea was born, or when it was created by Kim Il Sung and his friends, Kim Il Sung faced a lot of political challenges and rivals in North Korea. So he constructed a political system whereby he's pretty much invincible or untouchable over time. So in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, he made that totalitarian dictatorial regime. And that system can be described with three key words: centralization, politicization, and inheritance. And that system is so centralized, politicized, and politicized that no one else can sort of be in the driver's seat in North Korea except for the leader. And so Kim Il-sung created that system. It was pretty much perfected by the 1970s. It's constitutionalized, okay, in that it's pretty much unconstitutional in North Korea for anyone else to run North Korea. That's the kind of system we have. And that system was inherited and fine-tuned by Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un in later years. So we have that political system that is, pretty much rock solid, based on that sort of Kim dynasty. Okay, it's a communist monarchy or communist dynasty system, which is really odd, okay? But it's there. And Kim Jong Un, he's more hands-on than his father Kim Jong Il, and we have to understand how North Korea knows how to calculate. They may be evil. We can have all sorts of adjectives regarding North Korea, but they know how to calculate. They're extremely strategic, because if they were crazy or stupid, they would have died a long time ago. They know what they're doing in terms of keeping the North Korean leadership system intact. The other side, the other thing that explains North Korea regarding the domestic aspects is that we do not have, or we have very little revolts or attempts to overthrow the regime through riots or coup d'etats and so forth, because that in itself is an extremely challenging task. The North Korean regime has ways of preventing and preempting any challenge or contradictions to the leadership. whether it be to the military, the police, patrolling, mutual surveillance by the people, and so forth. Right? There's eyes and ears everywhere. And so again, the people will dare not to sort of step out of line or do something so rash, okay, bold against the regime. And so it's really about the fact that North Korea is one of the most strictly monitored societies in the world, or probably the most strictly monitored society in the world. And the other point that we can add here is that the people in North Korea are not familiar with political alternatives. They've grown up in that system that I just talked about since they were born. It's an extremely regimented society. They hear about, or they may see sometimes illegally through, for example, foreign movies, like particularly South Korean movies, about the democratic systems, right? They see, for example, South Korean films and say, wow, the life in South Korea looks so much better than ours. Life in Japan looks better than ours, or life in US or anywhere else looks better than ours. The problem is they don't know how to achieve that. They know that they are in pain. They know they're being mistreated. They know that the situation in North Korea is not good. But the thing is, they don't know how to get out of that system. They don't know how to organize any kind of political opposition against the regime. That is the real important. It's about knowledge. Also, the other thing is that a lot of people in North Korea, and I speak to a lot of people who have escaped from North Korea. They are thinking their immediate goals are to survive. They want to get money and food for today and tomorrow, and that a lot of their energy is put into that. And so therefore, they don't really have that sort of room to think about politics, or they don't want to sort of dare to go into politics just yet, because again, the first thing that comes to mind is, again, how to survive. And so we see some things such as illegal market activities. That's one thing that they often do. We also have bribery and all that kind of stuff. But again, those things for economic survival is to make money and get food and so forth. So for now, we just simply do not see that momentum in North Korea by the people or even by the military to overthrow the regime. Now, a lot of people do ask about, or they often comments that we often hear are that, okay, if the leadership dies, because if Kim Jong-un dies, well, then the problems will be solved. Well, if the North Korean leadership dies, due to whatever cause, yeah, we see a break in a dynasty, maybe. Okay, we see the end of what was an extremely evil regime. But the problem is this: it doesn't mean that the situation There's no guarantee that the situation will get better. Because the thing is, once again, the system is so centralized and politicized based on that Kim dynasty. If we see a break at the top, things are going to fall apart. So, for example, the military could break into various components, like some who are regime loyalists, who want to sort of revive the old Kim dynasty, some who are reformists and say, no, the past is really bad, let's democratize North Korea once and for all. And also we're going to have some that will say, no, the Kim dynasty was too soft, we need to be harder. And so they'll try to bring in like a militarist regime. And we're also going to have some bandits who do not care about politics, but they just want to take advantage of the situation. So it's going to be so that is one. There's that fear of a civil war inside North Korea that's going to be extremely chaotic. And also, as a lot of people understand, democratization takes time to implement. And so therefore, although it's easy for us to say we need to democratize North Korea, it's easy to make that prescription. Putting that into place or implementing and systemizing that is not going to happen in an instant. It's not an event, it's a process. And so that's something that we always need to think about, because you and I, we look at various countries, right? You do a lot of work on Europe and Middle East. You understand the challenge of democratization. You understand the challenge of rehabilitating societies after they come out of a major conflict or measures of contingency. And we're going to see the same in North Korea. Even if we have unification, again, there are going to be a lot of challenges in terms of, for example, copying and pasting the liberal democratic system in South Korea to North Korea. And so that's something that we have to think about, because also there's going to be a lot of nationalism in North Korea as well. When an old regime collapses, there's often new type of nationalism to say, let's make our country better, blah, blah, blah. and that may not always be in the same line or on the same wavelength as the feelings in South Korea. So there's a lot of things that we have to think about there. But once again, like the bottom line is that North Korea is trying to modernize without compromising its political control, and that's what Kim Jong Un is trying to do right now. Yeah, North Korea is an encyclopedia of human rights abuses and various other kinds of problems. We see human security problems, we see environmental problems, we see political problems. That there's no political liberty and so forth. We see social problems, bribery, crime, exploitation, and so forth, even slavery. And we also have, of course, a military threat. But that also means that North Korean leadership is facing a lot of dilemmas. And it's really about how a lot of attention is needed on how Kim Jong Un addresses those dilemmas in the coming years. I can't predict how long North Korea will, survive or how they will end or whatever. But what we should watch for is how Kim Jong Un makes his decisions regarding the governance and management of the country when there's all these various questions popping up. The political, economic, military, social, environmental questions in order to sort of manage North Korea.
Thank you very much for your insights on North Korea, and also thank you very much for answering some of the most frequently asked questions in Japan. And it seems that there's still a lot to watch regarding North Korea.
Yeah, again, we've always faced the North Korean threat in one way or the other. But at the same time, I don't think it's right to sort of treat the situation as like business as usual. We are seeing new changes, we're seeing new developments. The North Korea that we see now is very different from the North Korea we saw 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. So there's a lot of things that we have to watch out for here. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
yeah.
Joe.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, today was a little bit different, right? I was the one sort of being interviewed, right? Where I'm normally the one that's interviewing. But this sort of worked out, yeah.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll probably do this once again sometime soon. But at least in the meantime, that's it for this episode of Rose Talk. Thank you for tuning in. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, as we'll be bringing you many more episodes that features a lot of great guests and also conversations about various things that's going on around the world. So stay tuned and also take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.